Story 1. I randomly sat down next to my future wife and the mother of my children on the first day of college. My life may have turned out very differently if I had sat somewhere else. Story 2. A coworker asked me to join him at the gym. I had never been to the gym before and was ready to laugh in his face. I said screw it and agreed to one session for the hell of it. Now I go 4 times a week, and my self-esteem and general mood have skyrocketed. It is my happy place now. Story 3. Around 2010, during the recession, I was a recent bachelor's graduate and could not find a job. I went to work in retail because student loan payments had started. One day I received a postcard about attending community college. An old professor and I discussed it, and he suggested I return to school for a credentialing program. I decided to enroll immediately. 15 years later, I work for the federal government and have saved enough to buy my first home. Story 4. This is my favorite story. In early 1998, I was a disheartened student at university, getting ready to drop out. Truth be told, I was probably in the worst mental state of my life up to that point, with no direction and no hope. My friend worked for an internet service provider, and his boss asked him to set up an internet relay chat server. He did not know how, but he knew I did, so he asked if I would mind doing it for him. 15 minutes later, the server was up and running, and he said, "If you want to hang out on that server, go for it." I ended up hanging out on that server and actually helped run the network for a while. A few months later, his boss was impressed that I had set the server up, and my friend told him I knew Linux administration and that they were looking for people who knew Linux and were available on short notice. By that point, I was being expelled from university, so I needed a job. I was hired. His boss even paid my moving costs as a gift, and I started my first real information technology job. That boss was probably the coolest person I have ever worked for. He gave us ideas and let us implement them with minimal oversight. As long as his customers were happy, he felt the best thing to do was let us learn and improve our skills as we went along. But he was always on hand to help if we had questions. I learned a great deal from him and from my friend, who became my manager. He sold the company for millions and retired in his 30s. I suppose his philosophy worked. In 1999, I was on that internet relay chat server and met my future wife. I moved to the United States of America to marry her a year later, and I am still here. I used the experience gained from that job to kickstart my information technology career in the United States of America. 15 minutes of work changed my life. Story 5. When I joined the military after high school, I did not think much about which job I wanted. My mother advised me to choose something useful when I got out, so I became a medic. After 4 years of service, I worked in the cardiac catheterization laboratory, dealing with pacemakers, stents, and other devices. Those experiences opened opportunities in cardiac medical device sales, where I have worked for the past 30 years. It has been an amazing ride, and I feel very fortunate and blessed. Story 6. When I joined eHarmony, the default was to search for matches within 25 miles. Although I lived in a large city, I changed the search radius to 75 miles. The next day, I received a message from a woman who lived 70 miles away. She turned out to be the most beautiful and amazing person, and she had also set her radius to 75 miles. I married her. It was the greatest thing in my very fortunate life. Story 7. Going to a charity softball game despite never having played softball in my life could legitimately be called the start of my career. I graduated law school in 2010 and passed the bar. In 2011, 1 in 8 of us was unemployed. Not just without a job in the legal industry, we were talking do not have a job, period. I was scraping by with 4 part-time jobs in 3 different cities. Meanwhile, I was chatting on a college sports message board for my alma mater. One man, a lawyer who knew I was looking for work, said one of his teammates had backed out of a charity softball game and asked if I would fill in. I had never played softball. The last time I picked up a bat was in t-ball at summer camp around 1994. I remembered the line from the movie Ghostbusters, "When someone asks if you are a god, you say yes," so I agreed. At 11 o'clock that night, I went to Meijer to buy a glove and a softball. I arrived at the park the next day and found a bunch of drunk lawyers. There were absolutely zero business discussions. I was basically a warm body in left field and managed maybe a single in the entire tournament. Nothing came of it in the following weeks, so I wrote it off. In December, I had ended my apartment lease and had been living in a friend's spare bedroom for 3 months to stretch my money and avoid moving across the country to live with my parents. I received a call from the man on the message board. His firm needed a new associate attorney, and he appreciated that I had agreed to play softball despite my lack of experience. I interviewed later that month. In January, I had $151 left in my bank account, just enough for gas to get to my parents' house. 7 days before I was scheduled to move more than 1,500 miles, I received a job offer. My friend and I cried. I moved into an apartment 72 hours later and reported to work the following week. 12.5 years later, I am a military officer, a federal attorney, a homeowner, and financially independent. I could retire today. None of that would have happened without my willingness to leave my comfort zone. Trying things is better than not trying. Story 8. I was taking a psychology statistics course while studying music education. The professor mentioned he was collecting research data on the internet, which was a new idea in the mid-1990s. Since I did freelance work building websites, I asked him after class if he needed any help. That moment led to a series of events. I changed my major to psychology, earned a Doctor of Philosophy degree under his supervision, met my wife in his lab, and he helped me get my first job, which set me on my current career path. All of this came from a spur-of-the-moment decision to ask if he needed any help. Story 9. I went online at my aunt's house in Sydney and met my wife while browsing the internet. Story 10. I went out to a 1990s-themed pub crawl 7 years ago with a couple of friends I had met through a mutual friend. My mutual friend was not able to go, and I was hesitant because I had not really hung out with the others by myself before. I ended up having a wonderful night. I also met the man who would later become my husband. We have been together 7 years and have been married for 2 years. My life would be completely different if I had let my anxiety win and stayed home. Story 11. Not as life-changing as some others here, but I pivoted from drinking soft drinks to drinking only water. I realized I felt awful and did not like how much I was drinking, so I switched to water entirely. It has had only positive effects. I feel better and more refreshed, my skin improved, and the money I saved is significant. This change led me to eliminate other sugary foods from my diet and ultimately to want to eat better in general, which in turn led me to take better care of my body. It seemed like a small step at the time, but it spiraled into greater personal accountability for my health. Story 12. A while back, I stopped insulting myself, both out loud and in my thoughts. The positive effects on my mental health, patience, and anger management were far beyond what I expected. Story 13. This year, at 39, I've learned to say no. Oh my fucking God. Why have I waited so long? Try it. It's worth it. Story 14. I got off at the wrong subway stop. I realized I was close to an exhibition I had been invited to, so I walked a couple of blocks to check it out. I was so impressed by the work that I dropped out of my graduate program that week, and I was accepted into the new program a few months later. That accident completely changed the course of my life for the better. Story 15. A few years ago, our neighbors who owned chickens were moving away. They could not take the chickens with them, so we decided to take the birds in. We live in Chicago, which is not the most common place for chickens, and I was unsure whether I would enjoy having farm animals instead of a cat or dog. Within a few weeks, I learned that chickens are smart, cute, and clean, and I loved having them. Now we own 10 chickens, and I am trying to pursue a career studying them because they are so interesting. Story 16. I kept getting made redundant in my chosen career, so I accepted a family member's unpaid offer to help renovate their holiday home in another country for a few weeks. I just needed to get away. While I was there, my camper caught fire and I had no money to buy another, so I became a construction laborer to earn enough to return. That job defined both my career and where I lived for the next 30 years. Story 17. I took a temporary data entry job through an employment agency to pay for some Christmas gifts. A bit over a decade later, I became the information technology director. On another occasion, my friend invited me to the soft opening of a restaurant where his girlfriend was working. I am not one to say no to free food. One of the waitresses who worked that day became my wife. Story 18. I was going to the grocery store the day I ran into my future husband and gave him my phone number. Now I'm a fucking mom. Story 19. I decided to talk to the girl who had rejected me 6 to 8 months earlier, so I tried again because I had nothing to lose. The worst she could do was reject me again. We are now married. Story 20. I saw a poster at my high school advertising a volunteer program that would pay for Canadian youth to travel the country. I hated the small town I was in, so I wrote to them in 2001 for more information. They sent me a form to fill out, and soon I was on a plane to live with 11 other 17 to 21-year-olds for 7 months. Leaving home and being without my parents for the first time to live with a group of other young people, some of whom did not speak English, was a life-changing experience. It was fun, hard, and terrifying, and it taught me what I am capable of. The lessons from that experience help me every day. If whoever put up that poster had placed it in a different hallway, my life would not be anything like it is today. Story 21. In my 20s, I was working a pretty bad office job with low pay and little opportunity for advancement beyond becoming a supervisor. The company created a new account manager role, and the sales team was in town scouting potential internal candidates. After a long shift, I was on my way home when I received a call asking me to return to the office to meet some of the team, without any context. I was about to take the on-ramp when I decided to turn around. I got the role. It set me on a career path within the company and eventually led to my current job at a different company. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had kept driving home. Story 22. I paused at a grumpy-looking dude's photo but liked what he wrote. I swiped in the correct direction and met my husband. He is not grumpy. Story 23. I went to the gym on a rest day because I got out of an exam early. Now I am engaged to the love of my life. Weird shit, man. Story 24. I overslept on the first day of cross-country practice during freshman year of high school. Too embarrassed to return, I joined the debate team instead. I was very good at it and was recruited to attend a college across the country to be on their debate team, where I met my wife. We now have a baby girl. Sometimes I wonder, not sadly but curiously, what my life would have been like if I had gone to cross-country that morning. Story 25. I decided on a whim to work at a festival to be near an ex and do something fun. I ended up making a lifelong friend and meeting my first girlfriend, which helped me realize I am gay. That decision snowballed into many others, and reflecting on it now makes me very grateful. Thanks, Reddit, for the unexpected positivity. Story 26. I made a random comment replying to a friend of a friend on Facebook, and we ended up together for 9 years. It did not work out, but she is the reason I have a good career. Story 27. I was in a coffee shop filling out graduate school applications to pursue a Doctor of Philosophy in physics. The last school on my list was Pennsylvania State University. I stared at that application for a few minutes and suddenly decided I did not want to apply there. I browsed several physics program rankings and department web pages looking for a more realistic option and settled on the University of Massachusetts Amherst. The University of Massachusetts Amherst was the only school that accepted me. There I met my best friend and my future wife. We married in Amherst, although we no longer lived there. My doctoral advisor had a huge impact on my career, mostly positive, and my work with him paved the way for a faculty position I recently started in Germany. Sometimes I wonder what my life would have looked like if I had applied to Pennsylvania State University. Story 28. My life changed forever when I met Ben about 20 years ago. I befriended him in high school after he moved to Scotland and joined in second year. We bonded over shared interests. I played RuneScape with him and his brother, and later we played World of Warcraft. I was introduced to a friend of his brother who also played World of Warcraft. That friend's girlfriend worked in a store with my now wife, and I met my wife through them. We started dating after I was a groomsman and she was a bridesmaid at that friend's wedding. My close group of friends grew from a core group I met on World of Warcraft who lived in my city. Story 29. I turned left on Clark Road in 1973 and visited the town of Paradise, California. I moved there in 1977 and raised 3 great children with my wife. In fact, we lived 41 years in that wonderful town, all because I turned left to check it out. Story 30. I picked up my now ex-husband's phone off the floor so he wouldn't accidentally step on it and break it when he got up for work. I had no idea that later that day it would spark an argument that ended with me yelling, "What? You didn't want me to see pictures of your girlfriend?" I said it to be mean. I never thought he'd cheat on me. I was wrong. He was cheating and moved the person he cheated with into our house with my permission because I'm a big-hearted goon who didn't want to see someone my ex cared about go homeless. He married that person a few months later. I later learned he had proposed to them a month before the argument. Story 31. In 1992, just before the internet became widespread, I was a technical writer. I knew a lot about computers, so I went to my boss and offered to run network cables around the office so we could share files and printers. Within 2 years, information technology was my full-time job. Story 32. I do not have anything interesting to add at the moment, but I love the comments on this thread. There are some really compelling stories. Story 33. I told my best friend that I had feelings for her. 6 years later, she is my wife and was single-handedly the reason I stayed. She gave me something to live for. Story 34. I agonized for a month over switching one of my high school classes. I ended up doing it, but by then the new class was almost full, so I was seated next to a guy I did not know, which annoyed me because my friends were in the next row. This guy and I were in completely different social circles and never would have spoken otherwise. He is now my husband, and we have been together for 15 years. Story 35. I swiped right on Tinder, met the right person, and ended up with a wonderful wife and children. Story 36. I had a date scheduled with someone I matched with on Bumble. The day arrived and I was just over meeting people and not liking any of them. I almost did not show up because that would have been rude, so I went, fully expecting another disappointment. Turned out he was a pretty cool guy. We got along great and we got married. Story 37. I got really drunk with my best guy friend on a business trip after a rough day, and we decided to order sushi to our hotel room. He was lying in bed looking at DoorDash, and I lay down next to him so I could see the menu. We're married now. Story 38. I visited a park on a random day and sat on a bench next to my now husband. He is the most genuinely loving person I have ever met. Story 39. I transferred to a section I did not want, but it led to a life filled with warmth and love I never knew existed, thanks to my classmates. Story 40. I walked away from my central processing unit in 2009 to get drunk instead of finishing the transaction to buy Bitcoin. It was 3 cents. I pissed away generational wealth. Story 41. Back in 2009, I skipped studying to go hiking. Eavesdropping on other hikers on the trail, I learned about a free hiking club in the area. I immediately went home and signed up. Through the connections I made in that club, I traveled the world, was introduced to Burning Man culture, and met my wife. It was just a little hike in a local park that set my life on an entirely different path. Story 42. I randomly decided to take a video game off the shelf that I had not played in a year and try the online multiplayer component. For months later, I met a woman there, and we have been married since 2007. Story 43. One of my friends in high school convinced me, the least athletic and least healthy person, to join him in cross-country and track. At first I said no because I did not want to run for fun, but I went to summer conditioning with him because he kept encouraging me. Within a year I was in the best shape of my life. I was able to manage my asthma better and I felt confident about my body for the first time. I made lifelong friends on the team. Even though I do not run as much as I used to, I retained the healthy eating habits my coach taught me, and I have a much healthier relationship with food. I suffered from eating disorders throughout middle school and during my first year of high school. Back then, I did not think I would be able to eat without guilt. Another small but significant thing was that I could fit into the prom dress of my dreams. I always had a small dream of wearing a prom dress without hating myself, and I was so happy to have achieved it. Story 44. During a girls' night out, I got a tattoo with friends. It was spontaneous and out of character. When I got home and showed my husband, he lost his mind, called me white trash, and said I belonged in prison with all the other trash. He punched things, trashed the house, and made me sleep on the couch. That was the end. I decided to leave that night. After 7 years of mental and emotional abuse, I was done. I don't think the tattoo alone would have made him that angry, and God knows I might not have had the courage to leave if things had not been so bad. Getting that tattoo was the best spontaneous thing I ever did. P.S. I now have 4 more tattoos. Story 45. Passing on the scary-looking gym. Back in 2010, I was living in Sydney, Australia, for my first engineering job after university. I was extremely unfit. A walk from the train station to my apartment was just over 1 kilometer but took me close to an hour with a backpack that contained only a laptop. Took me 10 minutes to climb 2 stories. One day I had had enough and found the 2 closest gyms in my area. The first was Gold's Gym. The window showed only muscular men lifting weights, which looked intimidating to me. The second was Fitness First, and it was the opposite. So I signed up with a personal trainer who, over the next few years, taught me not just to be fit, but to truly love exercise and fitness. Fast forward to today. In the time since then, I have moved back to Brisbane, gone through a total body recomposition, run a few marathons, switched to powerlifting, and completed a degree in exercise science. Life is different. I do not know what it will be, but it is miles away from where it was, and I could not be happier. Story 46. I unbuckled my seat belt on Indian Airlines flight number 440 moments before it crashed. I have lived 52 extra years and counting. Story 47. I was in law school and the Super Bowl was coming up. A casual acquaintance kept pestering anyone who would listen to throw a party. He was absolutely obnoxious, and I relented just so he would stop talking about it. I threw a party and got very drunk on tequila with a woman who dropped by because her friend had pressured her into coming. She did not want to go, but apparently the friend's boyfriend would be there and she did not want to go alone. It took a lot of convincing, and even then she was eager to leave as soon as she arrived. I offered her a shot of tequila, which turned into many more and the most intense and graphic public makeout session of my life. 10 years later, we are married, still best friends, and have a baby boy. We are no longer friends with those people, but we are glad they were so insistent and annoying at just the right time. Story 48. I got 2 girls' numbers the day before Christmas break in 11th grade. I had known the first girl since 5th grade, but I was not sure how she felt about me. I decided to call the second girl. We dated for 9 years. It was a very toxic relationship, and she cheated on me with at least half a dozen people. The first girl went back to her ex. They married and had children. He is a narcissistic jackass. They got divorced, and I have been married to the first girl for 5 years. Could have been 15 years, but that is life. Story 49. I will never lie about anything again, no matter how small or insignificant, and regardless of how unpleasant the truth may be or the consequences of telling it. The truth is one of the greatest adventures in life. Story 50. I accepted a casual shift on the opposite side of town, a full 2-hour trip by public transport. I was single and on dating apps, and I had some heavy self-imposed restrictions about distance from my location. On my tea break, I opened the app. I saw a woman I thought was out of my league and assumed she would be weirded out by me, so I moved past her profile. While looking at the next profile, I paused because something felt off. I went back, changed my mind, laughed at myself, and returned to work. Lunch, I came back to find we had matched. My first date with my fiancé lasted 7 hours, though it was originally intended to be just coffee and a walk around the botanical gardens. We spent the whole day together, went to the zoo after the gardens, and finished with dinner at a board game cafe. We now have a 6-week-old daughter named Avienda, who is a beautiful blessing. The store where I worked that shift has since been bulldozed, but had I said no because of the travel time, my life would look very different. Story 51. I tried psilocybin once. It might be easier for me to die later on. I'm serious. It is usually very misunderstood by many despite research into its medical uses. I'm sorry you are feeling this way. Are you thinking about harming yourself or planning to end your life? If you are in immediate danger, please call emergency services right now or go to the nearest emergency room. If you are in the United States, you can call or text 988 to reach the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. If you are outside the United States, Tell me your country and I will help find local resources. I can stay with you here, help make a safety plan, or find someone you can talk to now. Story 52. I volunteered to tutor children in basic reading and arithmetic during high school. Being hired as a part-time assistant teacher led to other opportunities, and I am now an educator. Story 53. About 4 years ago, my middle-aged husband climbed an old, small tree with the kids in our backyard after they asked him to. A branch broke and he fell about 2 meters. He thought he had broken some ribs and was in pain. He went to the hospital to have his ribs x-rayed, and they found a large cancer on his pancreas that was on the verge of metastasizing. It was neuroendocrine cancer and his ribs were fine. Climbing that tree saved his life. Story 54. I stopped attending a Christian fellowship centered around universities. Took a while, but it has tremendously improved my mental health. Years later, I found out they were a borderline cult-like organization. The people there pretended to be constantly happy because they claimed a conduit to God. I was in too deep at the time to be aware. Fortunately, I did not lose much money to the various donation requests. The leader even asked me to pay for his son's private education. Story 55. Getting into Dungeons and Dragons has had a very positive impact on my life. I have made many friends and had a lot of fun. Story 56. Set my Tinder bio to like the girl next door but with balls. I had obviously given up trying and caring, and this one-liner scored me a wife. Story 57. A good friend and I were driving home separately one night after a race meet. Somehow I got lost and ended up in a small town. I met the girl of my dreams, my best friend, and my mentor there. In the short time I stayed, my mentor guided me to make a conscious decision in my final race that year. I chose to help an old racing veteran after he had a big crash. If I had never gotten lost that night, I would not have become a multiple-time champion or found my new home. Story 58. This is my story. I used to manage a team of personal trainers at a gym in Australia. A teacher from a local special needs school came to the gym asking for help teaching her students how to use the equipment so they would develop healthy habits after leaving school. As manager, my role was to help the other personal trainers get clients, so I forwarded the request to anyone willing to try. The program required a clearance to work with children, which at the time only I had. I volunteered and the following week led a 1.5-hour session with 8 students, teaching them to use the treadmills and exercise bikes. I was hooked and continued each week. After a couple of months, parents asked if I could work privately with 2 students. That was 9 years ago. I left my management position and my lecturing role and gradually stopped general personal training. Now we look after just over 100 participants with special needs each month. My whole life now revolves around this work. When my alarm goes off on Monday mornings, I feel excitement rather than dread for the week ahead. I feel very lucky. Story 59. I messaged a cute girl on MySpace because she mentioned Tom Petty in her profile. We have been together 16 years, married 12, and have 2 children. Story 60. At 16, I accepted a lavishly illustrated copy of the Bhagavad Gita from some Hare Krishna devotees, mostly because I appreciated the artwork, but also because I had a general interest in different religions. When my very Christian family discovered I had it, they threw me out of the house. Story 61. I went to support a friend's fate. I bought a raffle ticket and won some sunglasses. I also won a husband, 2 cats, and a beautiful toddler. I nearly let my anxiety stop me from going. Story 62. I went to an overpriced law ball even though I did not want to. I had had bad experiences at them before and almost bailed. But I went because I did not want to let down my friend who invited me. I was seated next to a man who was my polar opposite. We have been inseparable since that day, and he is now my husband and the father of our child. Story 63. I skipped class one day in college and bumped into a girl from high school who introduced me to my future wife. I should have been in class at the time. Story 64. I was mortified by in-person Tinder dates because I feared something unsafe might happen. So I used it only for meaningless text-only situationships. I put myself out there and went on a date, and he and I have now been dating for 4 months. I have an extremely good feeling about this. Story 65. I worked on campus as a front desk attendant in a dormitory. The semester was about to start, and I had just spent everything I had on enrolling. The night I went to work, the parking lot was packed with students moving into the dorms, and I was late with nowhere to park. There was a parking space designated for employees only. Although I was an employee, I was not allowed to park there. Since I worked overnight and planned to be gone by 4 a.m., I thought it would be harmless. A campus police officer ticketed me. The officer issued a $100 ticket for parking there. I went to the campus police department and asked to speak with the officer to explain that I worked there and to see if they could withdraw the ticket. The officer refused to speak with me. I could not pay the ticket. Because the fine was billed to my student account, it became an overdue balance, and students with unpaid balances were dropped from their courses. I was dropped from my classes and therefore from college. Losing student status also cost me my campus job. I still think about that officer and that one ticket. Felt like a sign that I was finished. I never went back to school. Story 66. I drove the back roads one day and found a great used car for my 20-year-old son for only $2,000. I feel untethered for the first time in 2 decades. Story 67. Hey, graduate school for a doctor of philosophy might be a good idea. I moved halfway across the country thinking I was leaving all my old girlfriends in the dust and that I would have a new dating scene. 2 months later, I was snapped up by a biker chick. As a hint, I am a total nerd, so I am not sure how it happened. Anyway, I got the degree and I have been married for nearly 25 years. Weird how things work out. Story 68. I guess I was getting divorced and had sworn off dating and relationships. I went to a 4th of July party and met a woman who became my wife. Story 69. I opened a penny saver when I was 19, which led to a job and then to living abroad for several years. Story 70. I was bored and posted an ad on Craigslist. A man responded, "We eloped and I moved to a big city. We divorced, but I overcame my mental health problems, graduated from a good school, found a great career, and met my now fiancé. I have a very good life." Story 71. I created a MySpace page. The cute girl messaged me a week later, and now we have been married for almost 20 years. Story 72. I went to a drive-thru for a burger the summer before my senior year in college. The employee who handed me my food was a graduate from the year before me. He said there were no jobs in our field. I got very busy. I volunteered for relevant work, completed a practicum for credit, and hustled during my senior year after 3 years of partying. I graduated, found a job, and launched my career. Story 73. Buying GameStop got me very interested in investing. Now I have a lot of money. Story 74. I went on a date with a man from a dating app, even though I had planned to bail on him after a long day at work. For years later, we are married. Story 75. One week I was bored because all my friends were out of town at the same time. Instead of spending the whole week at home playing Civilization, I arranged several first dates through a dating app to get out of the house. On one of those dates, I met my future husband. Story 76. Someone once told me never to say to myself what I would not say to a friend or loved one. What we tell others, they will believe. What we tell ourselves, we believe as well. Story 77. I went to a garage sale and bought the house. I lived there for more than 20 years, raising a family. Story 78. Hi. One random decision that changed my life was watching an Ippii video on YouTube. I was scrolling without expecting much, but he was talking about local lead generation and it made sense. Building and renting out websites sounded simple, and it completely shifted how I think about making money. It is amazing how one random click can change everything. Story 79. I was tired from university but took over a coworker's shift at a liquor store anyway. I needed the money and the manager deserved a break. I ran into a chatty customer who turned out to be the cousin of a film director at my dream studio. That led to contact with the director. The director took a liking to my work. We had a few calls over the next 2 years, and he became a mentor to me. A week before I was due to graduate, I received an email directly from him asking me to come on board as one of the first team members for his new project. I now have a television credit under my name and an upcoming film credit. As a graduate coming straight out of university and entering what is a very rough time in my industry, this has been a dream start. It has given me so much confidence in myself. It also led me to meet a lot of people who became my friends and changed how I see the world. Getting your foot in the door in this industry can take years, and it is not like I am working on small shows either. These projects will go on Netflix and be screened in cinemas. It has been a wild ride, and I am incredibly grateful for it. All because I took over a work shift and chatted with a customer. Story 80. I was getting off a train. I wasn't looking where I was going and I tripped, but a man caught me. We got married and have been happily married for decades. We have 7 children ranging in age from 20 to 40, and 4 grandchildren. Catching that train was the best thing I ever did. Story 81. I decided to be born. I have really messed up my life ever since. Story 82. I accepted a 2-week job from an acquaintance at a bar. Although I was employed at the time, the pay was much higher. I have done this for about 18 years and earn a large amount for the work I do. I have enough to retire now, but every payday I remind myself that people would give anything to earn this money, so I keep accepting it. Story 83. In February 2016, I was at a small party. I was not feeling like partying but decided to show up for an hour just to make an appearance. I planned to stay sober and drive home. I met a man I had never met before. We chatted for about 5 minutes and he asked if I was sober and if he could have a lift. We started talking in the car and hit it off really well. 2 weeks later, he hosted my birthday party and made the cake. 2 months later, I had moved in with him and his housemates. 8 years later, we are still best friends. Story 84. Forgiving the 4 men who ruined my life made everything easier when I chose forgiveness every day. You don't realize how much bitterness and anger affect your life. Story 85. I decided to have a couple more drinks instead of going home for the night. I stumbled into the World Bar in King's Cross and bumped into my wife as I walked through the door. Story 86. I decided to take 2 hits of good blotter acid before the Grateful Dead concert at Atlanta's Fox Theater in April 1980. Story 87. I stopped my ex-husband from breaking up with me when we were dating, even though part of me thought we should end the relationship. Years later, we married and now have a precious son. If I had let the relationship go earlier, I would not have my darling boy, who is the light of my life. Story 88. On the first day of 2nd grade, my mom packed me 2 snacks because we had 2 snack times in 1st grade. At snack time, the girl sitting next to me realized she had forgotten hers and started crying. I gave her my good snack, cookies, and ate my healthy snack, carrots. We have been best friends for 20 years. Story 89. Long story, but I will give the short version. I decided to go to the pub with a friend after work one day. We ended up getting drunk and he was arrested for fighting. After trying and failing to get him out of the police station, I was contemplating going home but decided to go to the local club for a few more drinks. There was a debutante ball and I met the most beautiful girl I had ever seen. In my drunken haze, I managed to convince her to leave and come hang out with me. We ended up falling in love. That was nearly 20 years ago and she is still the love of my life. If I had gone home that night, I likely would never have met her, as she did not live in my town and was only visiting for a few days. Best insignificant decision I ever made. 2 weeks after I met her, I flew to Sydney and we spent a week falling in love and became inseparable. The day I left Sydney, I made my second insignificant decision and took the only cigarette lighter we had been using. She used her last matchstick to light a candle so she could use it to smoke throughout the evening. That candle caught the curtains on fire and burned her apartment out, completely gutting it. Being homeless, she was forced to move home to her parents while she sorted her life out, which was only a few hours from where I lived. That second insignificant decision changed both our lives. That is my story. 20 years later, I am still the lighter thief. Story 90. I uploaded a song to YouTube to see if people liked my voice. A girl found it in the sea of the internet, and 16 years later, I live in Australia. I am South American, and we have been happily married for 9 years. I did not see it coming. If it had not been for my friend's old Logitech camera, it would never have happened. He was not using it at the time. I tend not to believe in fate, but this feels a bit like it. A wonderful, specific set of events. Story 91. I saw a cute guy I had run into a number of times over the years while working at a bar. It had been a few years since I last saw him. I walked up to him and said, "Hey, do you remember me?" We hit it off. We've been inseparable since and are approaching 3 years together. He helped me realize that bartending was killing my spirit and was not my forever career. There is nothing wrong with bartending. It just wasn't my path. I had worked there 7 years, and it was hard to imagine a new direction after becoming the most senior staff member. He encouraged me to finish my degree. I literally only had to finish the paperwork, which felt so dumb, but I did it. Then I finally snapped, could not take working at the bar anymore, and put in my notice without really having a plan. He was there for me and supported me through some very tough times. I was dragging my feet trying to figure out what I wanted to be when I grew up, and he kept searching for me for 9 months. One day, while I was in tears on the couch, he asked if I wanted to be a polar engineer. I was angry and did not want to say yes, but I thought, wow, a job like that in this town? I worked hard to get my resume together with the help of his aunt. We practiced interview questions and how to navigate the opportunity. I got an interview. I was so nervous but thought maybe it went well. Then I waited for a few months before finally working up the courage to call. The job had been filled. I was gutted. How could I apply for another job when I knew there were people in my town who were polar engineers? Nothing seemed even half as cool. But I eventually swallowed my pride and applied for another position at the company. Not a polar engineer role, but something to get my foot in the door. The interview went well, and I was working there within a few weeks. My boss and I got along well, and I fell in love with the work. The company is small, and I was working alongside the polar engineers, doing similar but not identical tasks. After about 9 months, it was mentioned that the polar team would need assistance for the upcoming season and volunteers were needed. I quickly asked my boss, and he told me to go for it. I threw my name in the hat and hoped I would be joining them in Antarctica. And guess what? I am lying in bed in Antarctica, getting ready to fly up to Mount Erebus later this week to assist with the installation of a seismic network. We will be camping on Mount Erebus for over a month to complete our tasks. Life is crazy. I probably could have made it here on my own, but go say hello to that cute guy you've had your eye on and see what path life can take. Story 92. I saw an ad for a farming job on Facebook. Despite having a high-paying job at the time, I sent them a message asking if they had any space for a casual position. They said no, and I went on with my life. A week later, they called me and offered a working interview. I went and gave it a try. They offered me a permanent job on the spot. Despite the significant wage decrease, I accepted and quit my other job. I was a youth social worker in the justice system and had reached a point where I had lost my faith. Now, instead of watching a dysfunctional system send unwanted children to juvenile detention because it is cheaper, I do not have to deal with people at all. I get to see every sunrise and sunset, see deer, birds, kangaroos, and wombats, breathe fresh air, wear no suits, experience no stress, and work at my own pace. I have zero regrets and do not care about the pay because I am genuinely happy. Story 93. I was flat hunting and on my way to a viewing. I passed an estate agent's office and, on a whim, decided to pop in to see if they had any flats that suited me. I have been living here for 15 years now. Story 94. On our office Spotify account, a colleague wanted to play Michael Jackson and typed Michael into the search bar, which shows many artists named Michael. He accidentally clicked on Michael Ray instead of Michael Jackson. Boom, instant country fan. I had never really explored the genre before. Being from the United Kingdom, country music is not as big there as it is in the United States, especially 7 years ago. Since then, I have been to countless country gigs and festivals, and I am in love with the genre. Story 95. I did not listen to what my parents told me to do. If I had followed everything they told me to do, I would be divorced, probably a single mother with no money, and working in a job I absolutely despised. Story 96. One night, while bored in my college dormitory, I spontaneously said yes when a stranger asked me to go to the movies with him and a group of people I did not know. We dated for 11 years and had a son together. Story 97. Deciding to take an impromptu trip to Colorado made me realize I can do my job anywhere. I moved there for work, then relocated for a raise. I received a 170% pay increase from my original position. Story 98. I chose not to go on vacation. I decided to stay home and find an internship that opened up my career prospects. Story 99. When I was 19, I applied for a job on a whim. I ended up working there for 10 years and met some of the most amazing people along the way. Story 100. The moment I realized that if there is even a crumb of criticism disguised behind a passive comment or question, I should not say it. It is working wonders for my interactions and how I feel afterward. Story 101. I attended a yoga class, got hooked, and became a yoga teacher. Story 102. I made a random post on social media once because I was bored, and I met my fiancée. Story 103. Commenting to a good friend that they looked good in a photo. We are planning our wedding. Story 104. One night I decided to drive 2.5 hours for a meetup after a friend's birthday. I ended up rolling my car and discovered how little my family cared about me. I also learned that my best friend and her mother did not care about me and were abusing me in subtle ways. A year later, I still have no car, but I walked away with no injuries except for some bruises. I have finally cut off my family, and I feel better for it. Story 105. I decided to jaywalk across the car park instead of following the footpath to the shopping center. That choice saved my life. Had I followed the footpath, I would have been caught in the substation explosion that killed 2 workers. Story 106. I messaged a man on Reddit on a whim because his profile picture caught my attention in a local subreddit. We went on a date and have not looked back. We live together now, and it is the healthiest relationship I have ever had. I have never been happier. He asked me to be his life partner almost 2 years ago, and I gladly accepted. Story 107. I sent a shit post on a dating website and ended up meeting the love of my life. I am convinced she's the one. I also got scammed out of $500 on eHarmony, laughing out loud, the most expensive shitpost ever. Story 108. I walked into a motorcycle store to look at a dream bike. I got offered a job there selling bikes. 10 years later, I am a professional in the automotive industry working as an engineer for a large original equipment manufacturer. Story 109. I backpacked for a year. Now I am a permanent resident of Australia and loving my life again. Story 110. I heard Illmatic for the first time in October last year. It hooked me on hip-hop, and now I'm obsessed with making my own music, which I plan to turn into a career. Story 111. I went on holiday to Australia in 2008. I am now married to an Australian and have 2 beautiful daughters in the best state of all, Western Australia. There is nowhere else I would rather be. Story 112. I got a direct message on Twitter from a random follower in 2010, responding to a photo of me at the beach on a very hot New Year's Eve. It just said, "Nice." The account had no identifiable handle or photo. I did not know their gender, age, or anything else. I replied, "Thanks." We continued chatting. I tweeted that I was driving home with my cat after staying with my parents. He replied by direct message, "Drive safely." 9 days later, we met to talk about photography, a shared interest that had connected us online. 5 years later, we married on the anniversary of our first meeting. We have been together ever since that first not official date. He still texts, "Drive safely, honey," almost every day. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.